Every 20 years, a black rainbow hangs over my town. For most people, a rainbow embodies hope. For the residents of my derelict seaside hometown, however, a rainbow invites only fear. Namely, fear that it might drain of colour at any moment. And every 20 years, it does. The townsfolk call it the Blackbow, an ominous arch that paints the sky, blotting the sun for 7 days. And the events that transpire are always unspeakably dreadful. You never see the phenomenon in national news, and it seems to be a self-contained event, something only the townsfolk can see anyhow. But even if we were to tell outsiders, who would believe our story? A rainbow cannot be black or white, and the Blackbow is not really a rainbow. In late November of 2003, on the cusp of winter, I was a 14-year-old boy who was totally oblivious to the solemn faces of older townsfolk. Faces that I recall had been increasingly agitated with every passing month. Mum's being so moody. For the whole of December, we're going to stay with Grandma in London, Ronnie huffed. I wanted to go to Anna's Christmas party with you guys. This blows. So does your mum, Alex said. I giggled and Ronnie kicked Alex in the shin. You're getting the whole month off school, I gasped. Ronnie shrugged. Guess so. Then why are you complaining? I laughed. If it makes you feel any better, my parents have been arguing a lot lately, Alex said. Dad said I need to see a therapist. They think I have depression. Ronnie and I awkwardly shuffled our feet, eyeing the ground. All I could think to say was, shall we go to the ditch to take your mind off it? And Alex, being a young boy who had clearly mastered the art of masking his pain with comedy, eagerly nodded his head. Sounds good, Charlie, he said. So we ran through the local park to the ditch, a chasm that had become a perilous playground for children in our town. And it was always busy. Hey Ronnie, Anna called. Ronnie blushed and waved at his crush, who was swinging on a tyre haphazardly tied to a tree branch. Her nearby friends giggled, and Alex pursed his lips, making smooching noises. I snorted, and Ronnie sighed. Will you guys shut up? Our blushing friend grunted. You know why I was so bothered about that party. I was going to ask her out. But a deafening crack sounded, and a chill coursed through the air, accompanied by an aggressive whistling noise. Is it about to rain? Anna shouted. Nobody answered. Our eyes were fixated on the shape that was forming above us. A colourless arch, larger than any rainbow I'd ever seen, tore through the clouds. I waited for red, orange, yellow, or any colour to appear. It didn't. It was only an unstable monolith. It vibrated as if it were threatening to disintegrate at any moment. What is that? Alex asked. I don't know. I gulped. Anna and her friends began to walk cautiously away from the ditch. She waved nervously at Ronnie, and he smiled back before returning his gaze to the unnatural thing above us. And then his phone started ringing. Hello? He said. Mum, what do you mean? Yes, I'm just at the ditch. What? I'll come home in... Why? But Okay, I'm coming home now. Flustered, Ronnie angrily thrust his flip phone back into his pocket. I have to go home, he said. Mum says we're packing and going to Grandma's right now. I don't think our teachers are going to like that, but... I pointed at the black rainbow. Is that why she's worried? Yeah, I've got to go, guys. She said she'll pack for me, and I don't want her to forget my Xbox. I guess I'll, see you after Christmas, Ronnie sighed, running off before we could say anything. Jammy Dodger, Alex huffed. Fancy you go on the tyre, seeing as it's free? Alex, don't you care that something's wrong with the sky? I asked. He shrugged. It's a rainbow. It's black. I don't like this. I think we should go home too, I said. Alex sighed, hanging his head dejectedly as we walked away from the ditch. And it was when we strolled through the park gates, which were swinging ferociously in the wailing wind, that we first started to notice things had changed on the ground, not just in the sky. It must have been early afternoon, but the rainbow had blackened the world beneath it. Lampposts had sprung to life. A car soared past at a frightful speed, swerving from side to side, whilst blinding us with full-beam headlights. Idiot, I grumbled. As we followed the main road towards the town hall, the insanity only seemed to worsen. The piercing pitch of the wind had veiled the ruckus at first, but we started to discern the cries of townspeople. More cars hurtled past. That was when the rain began to fall. Black rain, so thick and heavy that it shrouded the town. It started to collect on the bulbs of lampposts and the headlights of cars, gradually easing the world into a deeper realm of darkness. And each pellet of rain felt as if it might puncture my skin. There was an ill-meaning sharpness to it, an inescapable weight. What is this? Alex asked, nervously eyeballing the black, stodgy substance collecting in his palms. I don't know, I said, pulling my hood up, but I think we need to go home and check that our parents are okay, before we struggle to even see 2 feet in front of ourselves. Yeah, I think... Alex started. He was interrupted by the horrifying sound of metal coiling itself around something immovable, and we both snapped our necks around to see, in the thick of the black downpour, a crumpled Prius. It had melded with the town sign in the centre square, narrowly missing us. That looks like Dad's car, Alex cried. I silently shivered on the spot, and it was a great shock to witness the mangled driver's side door creakily swinging open. There was the terrible sound of misshapen metal grinding against misshapen metal. Other than the cacophony of rainfall, it seemed to be the only sound in the empty town centre. Every smart soul had fled. From the wreckage, a bloody man fell onto grass caked in colourless sludge, and he supported himself with shaky arms. The dying light scarcely illuminated the figure, but the car, even as a distorted wreckage in the dark, was familiar. It looked like Alex's father. Moments before the world entirely plunged into darkness, we got a good look at his face, but it wasn't a view that answered our burning question. The only remaining feature was his mouth, and when the faceless man parted his lips to scream, that mouth suddenly widened, splitting his head open like a raw egg. "Weak," he screeched in an inhuman wail. "Dad?" Alex whispered. The rain stopped. It had coated the road and lampposts in a stubbornly sludgy layer of unidentifiable horror. The sky was pitch black. Even the Blackbow was no longer visible. Pockets of light pierced the blackened, rain-smeared windows of houses, but Alex and I were well and truly in the dark, and all we could hear was the laboured breathing of the thing that used to be his father, We need to run, I whimpered in horror, seizing my friend's arm in a vice-like grip. I could barely see the pavement in front of me, let alone the abomination from the car wreckage. It meant he couldn't see us either. I hoped he couldn't see anything, given he only had a mouth. Then again, I could no longer be sure of anything. He was talking to me, Alex muttered. I ignored my friend, guiding him by the arm through blackened streets. I was grateful for the darkness. It concealed the horrors that we could only hear. The Blackbow's early. Why is it so early? One man cried, slamming a car door. Move! He's behind us! A woman replied loudly. And farther down the road, Please, Lucy, please, another woman pleaded. You'll hear me now, mother, a guttural voice replied. He's not my father, and he'll never be my father. The sound of screaming quickly gave way to squelching. My body started to tighten. A new type of fear gripped me. Whatever was happening, it was beyond anything a person should experience. You said that to me once, Alex continued. What? I asked, absent-mindedly scanning streets, trying to navigate a lightless world. He apologized, but he said men are supposed to be strong, and depression is a sign of weakness. Alex muttered, sniffling, but then he must have realised that he'd said too much. Or Mum told him off, I don't know. He apologised, said I needed to see a shrink. I'm sorry, Alex, I said, guiding us down the road I was certain would lead to my parents' house. It's him, he whispered. Just from that word, weak. I knew it was him. Before I could respond, the sound of a scuffle ahead caused me to stop in my tracks, placing an arm in front of Alex. We could barely see one another, but I held a cautious finger up to my lips. Ronnie, please! A girl screamed. Anna. We could scarcely see them in the darkness, but there were two silhouettes in the middle of the road. And as the head of one figure seemed to separate down the middle, I felt a sickness in my gut. Why won't you just drink? The thing snarled. Ronnie, something's wrong with... Please let me go, Anna whimpered. Girls, leading boys on, say one thing but mean another, the creature growled. As Alex and I cautiously waded through the black puddle to the other side of the street, I could faintly distinguish the thing prying open Anna's mouth with its fingers. She struggled and squirmed, likely trying to close her lips. I watched in fright as Ronnie shoveled black sludge from the road into her open mouth. It'll stop hurting soon, he said softly. Thank you. That was all I wanted. Alex and I were sobbing as quietly as possible, and I was grateful yet again for the cloak of darkness, shielding us from the majority of the horror. But I still saw too much, far too much. Anna was sobbing too, for half a minute or so, and then her sobs changed into laughter, or mania. I hate you, she growled. Thankfully, at that moment, I reached a house with distinctive windows. The glass panes were coated in black rain, but given the light cast through the murkiness onto our front lawn, the shape of the house was familiar. It had to be my home. And when I bumped into the gate leading onto the front path, I was entirely certain. I let go of Alex's arm for a second. Only a second. "Son!" a voice beckoned, and I couldn't see Alex anymore. I could hear the faint sound of feet wading through the black puddle. "Alex!" I cried through gritted teeth, not wanting to ingest any fresh droplets of rain that might emerge. "Come on, my house is right." "Go, Charlie," he interrupted. "Is that you, insect?" His father's voice roared from the far end of the street. "Crying again?" "I know that isn't you, Dad," Alex called. "It's this thing." Anna giggled. "Nobody likes him at school." "He's always been weak, Mr. Harding," Ronnie chimed in. "The bow said so." "The bow never lies," Alex's father said. "It would make a real man of you, Alex. No more weakness." "Dad, I want to help you. If we just take you home," Alex said, wading farther away from me. "Home? This is our home," his father replied. "Where's Mum?" Alex asked. I wanted to wade after him, but I was afraid. I didn't want to die. I knew somehow that Mr. Harding, Ronnie, and Anna could not be saved. But Alex, he didn't seem to care. Looking back, I can see that my friend was lost in whatever thoughts plagued him. So lost that he didn't notice reality disintegrating around him. And I suppose the Blackbow wanted him for that very reason. It feeds despair and cruelty into our minds. It fuels blackened thoughts that lie dormant in there. "In the garden," his father finally replied. Alex cried, and I heard the sound of multiple footsteps wading ever closer. Meanwhile, I was quietly inching the gate open, and then the wading ceased. "Bye, Charlie," Alex whispered. A scuffle commenced, too darkened for me to distinguish, but I could hear Alex choking, much as Anna had. I knew that the bow would take him too. I fumbled in my pocket for my house keys, crying inwardly as I heard Alex's cries subside. I thrust them into the lock, pushing the door open, and as I turned to close it behind me, the light from our front hallway illuminated the exterior of my house. Just beyond the gate, I could see them. Alex, Ronnie, Anna, and Mr. Harding, standing four abreast, heads transformed into ghoulish, wide-mouthed monstrosities. I slammed the door, locking it, and turning to see two fully faced, crying parents running towards me. I left that town long ago, as most do. My parents moved there in '87, so they had never seen nor heard of the Blackbow, and that's why I don't blame them for what happened. We would later learn about the ominous black rainbow from the real estate agent who sold the house to us. A little old man named Arnold. A man who had fled town with others as the bow formed on that day in 2003. My father pinned him against the wall until he spilled all of his secrets. "I knew about it," he said. 1983, 1963, 1943. It shows every 20 years. But you wouldn't have believed me. Nobody believes it until they see it for themselves. "You could have not sold the house to us," my father screamed. "This is my life, Mr. Carlson. My home. I have to make a living. And is the ugliness really that bad? It only lasts for 7 days, every 20 years. The rest of the time, this is the most beautiful town in the world. A slice of paradise by the sea. Why would you stay here? Why would anyone? My father cried. We know not to drink it. Just don't drink it, and everything will be okay. The storm passes. It always passes. My father asked the right question. Why would some stay? Perhaps they've come to believe the bow's lies. That place may be doomed to repeat its cycle. And I know that any day now, the black rainbow will return.
We celebrated Mother's Day differently in my village. And whenever this time of year comes around, my night terrors resurge. Quaking in my blackened bedroom, I often find myself eyeing the ceiling and reflecting on my youth. One particular memory, Mothering Sunday. What does that day mean to you? For most, it's a time of celebration. And I suppose the same could be said of my village. I abandoned my hometown long ago, but my freedom came at a cost. The place had no real name. We called it the Valley. It was severed from the rest of the world by lush hills and an unholy force that deterred visitors. See the hills at the border, Marlene? My brother once asked, pointing. I nodded. I want to know what's past them, Harry. My older brother tousled my unkempt, curly blonde locks of hair. Something better than this, kid. Come on. Mum's waiting. Which one? I timidly queried. Harry frowned. Our mother, Marlene. It was Mother's Day 2004, the day I tried to forget. I was only 9 years old. My brother must have been 18 or 19 at the time. He assumed the role of my father, a responsibility that must have weighed heavily on his shoulders. I never met my real dad, but Harry told me that he wasn't a good man. As the midday sun beat against the tarmac, scorching my shoeless feet, my brother and I sprinted through our idyllic town. We passed townsfolk in white garbs, dressed for the Mothering Sunday festival. They smiled pleasantly at us, but it was false pleasantry. Every year, on that day, a shadow hung over the town. Friends and families were bewitched by Mother, the Mother. Priest Hansen told me that Mother was simply the valley's symbol for nature itself, but I knew he was only saying that to still my anxious thoughts. Mother was real. Not human, but real. She lived in the rocky cliffside at one edge of town. Children would dare each other to enter the mouth of her cave, but nobody could. An unseen force stopped us. Make sure you tend to Lucy, Harry said. I sighed and walked around the side of our house, heading to the stable to feed Lucy. She was our ploughing horse on the farm, but we sometimes used her as town transport. We didn't have modern technology in the valley. Our village was trapped in a bubble of time. There was a rusty husk of a car on my neighbour's driveway that had belonged to his grandfather, from the days before Mother, when townsfolk could still travel beyond the hills. She must have arrived at some point in the mid-20th century. Mum, my real one, emerged from the back door of our house and smiled at me. She looked as crooked as every other villager on Mothering Sunday, but there was a shimmering tear in the corner of her eye, as if her lips were being paranormally puppeteered into that ghastly grin. It was as if my real mother were hiding behind that horrible face. Are you excited for the parade, sweetheart? Mum asked. I buried my head in Lucy's neck. I want to celebrate with you at home, Mum. She tutted striding over to me. Shame, Marlene. All in the valley must honour mother on this sacred day. But you're my mother, I said. Without a moment's hesitation, she slapped me across the cheek. I shrieked and looked into my mum's eyes. They had widened, and her lips were quivering. She wasn't in control of her body. Not on that cursed day. I knew that. Help your brother with the food, she ordered. Massaging my stinging cheek, I scurried past my mum and only allowed myself the luxury of crying once I'd entered the house. I called for Harry. What's wrong? My brother asked, appearing at the top of the stairs. Mum hit me, I whimpered. Harry smiled for a second, then he shook his head. He had finally come of age, and Mother's spell only seemed to work on the adults in town. Children hated the festival. No, it was worse than hate. We feared it. You're not wearing your dress, Harry said. Quickly, we have to bring the food to the market by 1 o'clock. I begrudgingly rushed upstairs, choosing to ignore the sinister expression I'd glimpsed on my brother's face. Hanging on my bedroom door was an atrocious white dress. Something a ghoul in a haunted house would wear. But I slid it over my head, as I was frightened of incurring Mum's wrath, and I helped my brother carry boxes of fruit and vegetables out of the house. We joined a procession of excitably chattering people. Everybody moved towards the heart of the village, gathering in the grassy town square. Bunting hung from all 6 corners of the centric gazebo, stretching towards Victorian lampposts. Mother knows best, the crowd sang in unison. I walked over to some of my school friends, and we meekly joined the choral chanting. It wasn't much of a song, just those same 3 words, repeated tirelessly in a dissonant, disjointed melody. As I talked to Brandon, one of my closest friends, about the weirdness of the festival, his mum rushed over to us. Happy Mother's Day, Marlene, she jubilantly cried. I feigned a smile. Happy Mother's Day, Mrs. May. You and Brandon would be a heavenly coupling. Have you considered my proposal? She gleefully asked. I gulped. Not now, Mum, Brandon grumbled. Nothing godly about pickiness, Brandon, his mum scorned. The next 7 years will fly by. 16 is an important age. Do you want another boy to marry sweet little Marlene Smith? We all serve the circle of life. Mother's circle. Thankfully, Priest Hanson scooted Mrs. May away. Brandon instantly shot a mortified look at me. Marlene, he began. It's fine, I awkwardly giggled. My mum's worse. All of our parents are terrible on this day. Tia, our other friend, sighed. It's always like this right before the choosing. Shh, Brandon sharply warned. They chose Zach's mum last year, and he's coming over now. Zach, bleakly hanging his head, was shooed over to us by his eerily chipper father. The boy hadn't spoken much at school over the past year. Hello, everyone, he mumbled. Hi, Zach, I said. How are you? He sniffled, wiping away a tear with the sleeve of his jacket. Dad wouldn't let me stay at home today. To heck with this day, Brandon whispered. We all quietly snorted at Brandon's comment, a comment that seemed outrageous in our childish minds. I felt like an outsider, free of the hive mind, free of Mother. Mayor Finley suddenly interrupted our conversation. Put your hands together for the mothers of the valley. He welcomed a procession of mothers, 100 I'd say, onto a large wooden platform beside the gazebo. The villagers applauded the mothers, clapping so loudly that I thought their palms might blister. Harry walked over and put his arm around me. "It's going to be okay," he promised. We watched our mum, who was donning the same white dress as every other woman on the stage, as she joined the lineup of mothers. "Congratulations to those of you who gave birth this year. You have the immense privilege of being nominated for the choosing. But old and new, all mothers are honoured on this sacred day," the mayor stated. "And we are all children of the mother." "Mother knows best," grown-ups chanted. "Yes, she gives and we take," the mayor said. "We are not worthy, which is why, every year, we must honour her on this holy day. We must feed her maternalism, so her boundless love does not wane. A mother must be sacrificed to mother." "You know, I heard that little Johnny tried to run away last week," Tia whispered to me. "He passed out before he could reach the hills, of course." "Nobody ever makes it past the hills," Brandon gulped. Mr. Johnson, the local shopkeeper, shushed us, and he wore the same sickening look of unwavering adoration as every other adult. "The choosing is a fair process," the mayor said. "I will draw a name, and Mother shall have her offering." The villagers waited in complete silence for Mayor Finley to pluck a name from a worn hat. He produced a small slip of paper, unfolded it, and nodded his head. "Juliet Smith," he announced. As a roar of joy erupted in the crowd, my friends looked at my blood-drained face. My brother clutched me tightly as I started to wail inconsolably. "Harry, don't let them take her." But when I looked up at my brother, he was smiling. There were tears in his eyes, revealing his true emotions, but his face told a different story. The demented look of joy filled me with horror, as did his absent-minded eyes, which locked onto mine. "Mother knows best," Harry said, grinning. Brandon restrained me as I tried to run towards my mother, but I never would have reached her. The crowd of celebrating villagers lifted her into the air, and Harry joined them. Seeing him robotically merge with the herd instilled me with sorrow and terror in equal measure. Only my childhood friends retained their humanity. Only we were spared the influence of Mother's captivating spell. We followed the crowd along a series of streets, over the ravine, and towards the cliffside, stopping before the lightless hovel in which Mother was said to live. "The Witch's Cave," Tia whispered. Zach, the only friend who understood my pain, placed a sympathizing hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry, Marlene. I'm so sorry." I didn't utter a word. I simply watched as my mother was delicately lowered by the crowd at the mouth of the cave. She didn't say goodbye to Harry or me. She simply joined the chanting of the hypnotized townsfolk as she vanished into the darkness. "Mother knows best." The crowd quickly dissipated. An hour or so later, my friends also left. Brandon stayed with me until the sun started to set. "I can't stay any later," he apologized. "My mum would kill me. If you want to stay at my house, I'll be fine," I coldly interrupted. As night blanketed me, I watched the cave entrance with teary eyes. And then the most terrible thing happened. I heard my mother's voice. Her scream echoed from the depths of the cavernous pit, but it was the following noises which would haunt my dreams for years to come. Crunching, snapping, and something else. "I see you." The ghastly whisper seeped directly into my ear, but I twisted my head to find nobody there. It had been a woman's hoarse voice, but it didn't sound human, or earthly for that matter. It was Mother. The witch. I knew it. When I turned to face the cave, I saw something which horrified me. A pair of eyes in the black void. 2 white spheres with faded yellowing pupils. I screamed again, but Mother quickly shushed me. "Run along now," she whispered. I screeched most of the way home, stopping only when my voice box finally failed me. And when I entered our home, I found my brother sitting at the kitchen table in the darkness. I lit a candle, illuminating his horribly smiling face, but there were tears streaming down his cheeks. I knew he was still in there. "Harry," I cried, "Mum's gone." He quietly looked up at me, smile painting his shivering face. Then he tapped his finger on a piece of paper. He was wrestling with Mother's control. I walked over to the table and read the words he had written. "Take Lucy beyond the hills. Tie yourself to her reins. She won't faint." I looked at Harry. "I won't go without you," I cried. He tapped more furiously on the paper. His grin seemed to grow more sinisterly jaunty by the second, proving the point he was trying to make. He belonged to Mother. It was too late for him, but it wasn't too late for me. I ran to each of my friends' houses, telling them my plan. One by one, horrifyingly, they refused me. Even Brandon, and he said something I'll never forget. "Oh, Marlene, the grass isn't greener beyond the hills. Mother knows best." And when he seized my wrist, I realized something. None of us were safe from Mother's spell. Age meant nothing. I wrenched myself free of my friend's grip, darted home, and hurriedly strapped myself to Lucy's back. "Right, girl," I said. "I'm going to black out when we reach the hills, but I need you to keep trotting, okay? Just take me away from here. Don't faint, please." And as my horse trotted along the road out of the village, I felt my eyesight falter. The colours of my surroundings seemed to merge together. The moon swirled, dividing into 2 beaming orbs that reminded me of Mother's eyes. She was watching me, and I attempted to scream as the world faded to black. When I woke, I was lying on Lucy's back, and we were somewhere unrecognisable, somewhere foreign and futuristic. Shiny cars sat on driveways, and the dawning sun illuminated modern shop fronts. Police officers were keen to question the girl who had entered their quiet country village on the back of a horse, but I never spoke about what happened. I ended up in an orphanage, enduring years of counselling, and I eventually adapted to the modern world. I understand why the valley has been forgotten by outsiders. Mother keeps people away. She plays with people's minds, but she doesn't need to use spells to keep me away. I hope she has forgotten about me. Still, sometimes, when the moon is particularly bright, I truly believe that I catch glimpses of her eyes.
I was asked to babysit a washing machine. "Pardon?" I responded incredulously. £200 per hour, Susan repeated. I know, I replied, but you said I'd be babysitting at... No, I must have misheard you. Where's the child? Child? Stephen laughed. We don't have children. You heard me correctly, George. Just watch the machine for a few hours, Susan said. That's all, isn't it, Stephen? Indeed, Susan, Stephen chuckled. Honestly, this new generation. You'd think they could handle babysitting a washing machine, wouldn't you? You would, Susan laughed. Perhaps we should write it on a piece of paper for him. Probably needs to be told through the medium of TikTok, Stephen said. The pair of them laughed, and I stifled the irritated huff that was itching to emerge from my tightly compressed lips. They were insufferable, but £200 per hour of babysitting was a staggering offer. It would have been staggering if I'd been offered that much to care for an actual person. But a washing machine? Let them have their fun, I thought. I was certain I'd have the last laugh. And so I bit my tongue. Nope, I said, smiling. I think I've got it. Good lad, Stephen said, ruffling my hair in a patronising fashion. May I take your coat? I shrugged, but Stephen had already slipped it off my shoulders before I could respond. He disappeared upstairs, which seemed a little peculiar, given they had a coat stand by the door, but I didn't question it. We'll see you at 11 o'clock, okay? Susan asked. I nodded, waving as they left. I lifted a middle finger as soon as the door had shut behind them. I was about to make the easiest £800 of my life. Maybe more if they stay out longer, I thought. Stephen and Susan Hall had always been the oddballs of the street. Nobody really knew them. And, despite their insistence to the contrary, I could have sworn they had kids. Tim and Rachel. Mum and Dad seemed to think not, which is why they were confused when the Halls offered me the babysitting gig over Christmas. When I found myself eyeballing a washing machine in their kitchen, I started to realise that my parents were probably right. There had never been a Tim or a Rachel. But I wasn't complaining about the bizarre request. As a broke university student, the thought of making eye-watering money in a single night had me salivating in seconds. As soon as the Halls popped round to make the offer, I rushed over to their house at the end of the street without another thought. Anyway, after that rude conversation with them, I initially planned to not even bother babysitting the washing machine, but I was so glad I eventually peered through the oval window, because I was treated to a sight of unexpected hilarity. A mountain of miniature outfits circled the rumbling drum. There must have been hundreds of items in there, all of them too small for any human to wear, and some were far more shrunken than others. It was a mismatched collection. Of course they're washing dolls' clothing, I thought, laughing aloud. Absolute nut jobs. I immediately sent pictures to my friends, obviously. No way, Johnny replied. Those two are so weird. I can't believe you're not babysitting actual humans. Didn't we play with their kids when we were growing up? Sarah asked. That's what I said to my parents, I replied. But they didn't think so. And Stephen and Susan said they don't have any children. Oh, but they do, Johnny said. Their beautiful baby washing machine. I snorted. Also, I'm just thinking about the photos you sent, Johnny continued. I recognise that teensy tiny t-shirt in the second picture. The one with the green turtle on it. See it? Oh my word, Tim wore that? Well, a larger version of that, Sarah messaged. Yeah, that name rings a bell, Johnny said. My heart dropped. Wait, Tim? Okay, this is getting weird now. I was part joking about them having kids, but that's the exact name I had in my head. Before my friends could respond, the doorbell rang. The sudden ding startled me, and my phone clattered to the tiles below, screen shattering dramatically. I groaned. Of course. I scooped up my wounded technological appendage, sighed at the screen I could no longer read, and placed the fallen soldier on the dining table. I stormed to the front of the house, ready to scowl at whoever had unwittingly caused my phone's demise. But when I flung the door open, nobody was there. Though I was certain I could hear a faint wailing sound, as if a distant scream was striving to capture my attention. With a heavy sigh, I closed the door and returned to the kitchen, frustrated that a sizable portion of the night's earnings would be going towards fixing my phone. I squinted at the device's splintered screen, but it was useless. I couldn't read what my friends had replied. Suddenly, my attention diverted to an unusual noise from the washing machine's innards. A sound that was hard to distinguish, though it had some sort of subconscious effect on my body, lining my skin with a wave of goosebumps and upright hairs, much like the wailing wind at the front door. It sounded like a chorus of piercing shrieks. I knelt onto the kitchen tiles, sighing as my jeans pressed into shattered pieces of my phone screen, and stared deeply into the whirlpool of minuscule clothes which filled the washing machine. The rumble of the drum, the rustling of a tire, and the whooshes of water mostly drowned out the mysterious noise. But it was there. I hadn't imagined it. A choral pang of despair. And then I saw something which filled me with a terror unlike anything I'd ever experienced. A fleshy creature, half the size of a pinky finger, slithered between two items of clothing. I yelled and immediately fell backwards, unable to pinpoint what I had seen, but entirely certain it had been no insect, no animal. I hurriedly smashed every button on the washing machine, desperate to end the cycle. I'm not sure why my instinct wasn't to run. My brain wasn't functioning correctly. I waited a few minutes for the water to drain from the drum, watching the still pile of tiny outfits. My body shook violently, anticipating movement from within the clothing, but there was nothing. No fleshy monstrosity pounced out, and then there came the dreaded ding to signify that the door was safe to open. The drenched pile of clothes sat motionlessly, and I spent several minutes summoning the courage to rummage through it. The never-ending piercing sound was louder. It was a muffled noise coming from the bottom of the clothes pile. I scarcely dared to look. Shrunken garments slipped through my fingers, and it was only upon closer inspection that I came to a horrifying realization. The outfits were stained with blood, and some sort of indistinguishable mush. I could feel the vomit rising in my mouth, but it was as I uncovered the final layer of clothes at the bottom that I finally unloaded the contents of my stomach. A graveyard of flesh lay against the drum. There were hundreds of shrunken bodies, horribly disfigured, bloodied, and mushed. But the worst part was that some of the miniaturized victims were still moving. The indiscernible peach-coloured things were people, and the piercing choral sound was that of their screaming. One of the less mangled people began to crawl over the small amount of clothes I'd created in the clearing. He was calling to me in a small, feeble voice. "Save us! Help!" he cried repeatedly. I watched in paralysed fear, trying to decide whether it would be safe for me to reach the palm of my hand inside the drum to scoop out the few people still moving. The man who had wriggled free from the mound of bodies seemed wounded and helpless, but I was terrified of touching that horror scene. With a deep breath, I outstretched my hand, placing it palm side up on the clothes at the bottom, and as the tiny man, along with a few other survivors, clambered onto my skin, I tried to conceal the shivers that spread throughout my body. The first man continued to shout as I steadily lifted my hand closer to my ear, but I soon realised I'd misheard him the first time. Not save us, help. "Save yourself!" "What's happening?" I whispered weakly. "What? Didn't you see Grace outside?" the man screamed into my ear. My body shivered as I realised that must have been who rang the doorbell. The tiny voice I heard wailing, It doesn't matter now. Just find your coat and get out of here, he screeched in a minute voice. Why do I need my coat? I asked, gulping. Because they'll shrink it to shrink you. I don't know how or why they do it, but it happened to all of us. They shrunk our clothes, and when we were small enough, they threw us into the drum too. I moved my hand to eye level, surveying the 6 survivors, 5 of whom were writhing on my palm. Only the main man seemed to be in any sort of fit state. Are you Tim? I asked quietly. What? Oh, the boy, he sighed. No, the Halls put their children somewhere special. Never mind that. Come on, you need to find your coat. I looked at the clock on the wall. Relax, it's 8 o'clock. They're not getting back until 11. They never went anywhere, the man screamed. In a near synchronized manner, the house's lights extinguished. Oh no, the small man whispered. They know. I'm getting out of here, I said, stumbling through the darkness. If you leave, that coat goes in the next cycle, and you become like us, the man warned. Or worse. And I didn't need to question what he meant. I'd seen the pulverized bodies at the bottom of the drum. Given the inexplicable nature of the tiny human in the palm of my hand, I'd reason to believe every last word he'd said. So, I made my way across the darkened entryway, opened the front door, and placed the miniature figures on the paving slabs. Go, I said. I could hear faint pained sounds from the ground as the man said something inaudible to me before helping his injured companions. Then, I stepped back into the lightless house, pulling out my shattered phone to use the flashlight. Thankfully, the screen still seemed to register my touch. Making my way up creaking stairs, the stillness of the house filled me with absolute terror, given I knew that the Halls were lurking somewhere within those 4 walls. And when I reached the upstairs landing, a door opened at the far end. A darkened bedroom beckoned. I knew it to be a trap, but I had no choice, according to the small man I had saved. Not that I could trust him either. Stephen? Sarah? I called. I just want my coat, then I'll go. I stepped into a large, lightless children's room. There were 2 single beds, and, most horrifyingly, a doll on each. Dolls that looked exactly like the 2 children I was completely certain I'd never imagined at all. Tim and Rachel. But they weren't dolls, and they weren't alive. They seemed to have been shrunken and stuffed. I threw up on the floor, and the light in the house suddenly returned, as Stephen and Susan entered the room through a side door. People are so weak these days, Stephen's voice growled. This generation sickens me, Susan sniffled. But not our children. They were pure, I cried. Why are you doing this? Why? Stephen frowned, frothing at the lips and brandishing my coat in his tight grip. To save our children, you ignorant fool. Your life will finally mean something. And seeing as you couldn't even wait for the next washing cycle, I guess we should head downstairs and start it now. You're insane. Save them. Your children are dead. Look at what you've done to them, I cried, gesturing at the doll-sized, pale-faced corpses in the beds. Susan shrieked. Quiet, you foul thing. We didn't kill them. This was the only way to save them. Save your energy, honey, Stephen said, placing a hand on his wife's shoulder. It's his turn now. And there's no running for him or his escaped friends. We'll catch them. We always do. Heart pounding, an idea came to me. An idea so horrific I didn't want to believe it had stemmed from my own brain. I stepped backwards and slammed the bedroom door closed. Then, I turned on my heel and ran to the top of the stairs, ignoring the cackling sounds behind me. I scurried downstairs and beelined for the coat stand by the door, scooping up 2 coats, one for Stephen and one for Susan. Hearing footsteps slowly plodding across the upstairs landing, I darted to the kitchen, realising I had mere moments before I was caught. I threw the coats into the washing machine, ignoring the blood and guts within, and shut the door. "It's useless, George," Stephen shouted, heading down the stairs. "You won't find any weapons in this house. But you can run. Go for it." I pressed the start button and, in a stroke of genius, hammered the plastic handle off the door, preventing it from being opened. Stephen suddenly emerged in the kitchen doorway, coat in hand and frown on his face. "What are you—" He stopped mid-sentence and dropped the coat to the floor. "No. Susan!" I thought I might have to fight them off, allowing the cycle enough time to work its magic, but the horror commenced as soon as their coats began twirling in the running washing machine. As Stephen spun around in the doorway, his limbs began to crumple inwards, shrinking in a matter of seconds. He screamed in excruciating pain, as did Susan, who was still walking down the stairs. Parts of his skin tore and bled, as had been the case for most of the victims in the machine. And there sounded a series of thuds from the staircase. Stephen, mostly crippled and reduced to half of his size, ran into the entryway, and I followed him. "No, Susan! Susan!" he cried, cradling his shrinking wife who had tumbled to the floorboards and cracked her head open. "What have you done? You monster!" Stephen dropped his wife and turned his attention to me, charging with a furious glint in his eyes. I watched with a mixture of relief and horror as the man lunged forwards, shrinking as he went, and fell at my feet as a shriveled, pinky-sized, lifeless husk, wearing blood and guts on the outside of his corpse. I slumped to the floor of the entryway, eyeing the miniature corpses of the halls, making sure they were truly dead. And then, after an unknown period of time, I hazily walked into the kitchen, poured a bottle of vodka across the dining table, and set it ablaze with a lighter. The fire spread quickly. As I was walking towards the open front door, I noticed Stephen's wallet on a dresser. There were 4 £20 notes inside. Not quite enough for a new phone screen, and certainly not enough compensation for the horror I endured. But it sufficed. I wasn't willing to spend a moment longer in that house.
The darkest things live in the light. My grandmother used to say that. Her invented idioms always seemed to carry greater weight upon reflection. Grandma was just philosophising about the monstrosity of mankind, but it so happened that her words rang truer than she could have ever known. It was November 2022. For a year I'd been living in Tokyo with the love of my life, a wonderful man named Akio. It wasn't easy for a 20-something-year-old girl from Blackpool to adjust to life in a new country, but Akio is the kind of person who makes everything seem possible. I know I was anxious when I first moved to Japan, but trust me, my sister's anxiety is so much worse. She's going to be twice as insufferable, I told him. A fair warning about our brother though, he's an acquired taste.
I gathered that from video calls in lockdown, Akio chuckled. I shook my head. That was Sam on his best behaviour. I have a horrible feeling you'll see him at his worst when he comes to stay. He used to scare away my boyfriends when we were younger. Well, you're not kids anymore, Akio said, shrugging. Besides, it won't be any worse than the interrogation from your parents during their visit, will it? I smiled and planted a kiss on his cheek. I love your boundless optimism, Akio. My younger sister and older brother arrived at a late hour. Terrible flight, Sam grumbled, storming through the front door of Akio's high-rise flat. He only moaned about it for 15 hours, Millie yawned, rubbing her squeaky eyeballs with the back of her hands. You're here now, I said, embracing my sister. It means a lot that you endured, Sam. My siblings strolled over to the floor-to-ceiling windows in the lounge. There was a mesmerising view of the capital's futuristic skyline. The dazzling lights of Tokyo formed a starry canvas against the backdrop of a desperately dark night. Glass-clad man-made mountains towered over us, and my oafish brother could only think to ask one thing. Which floor is this, Akio? I thought you were living higher in the building. I groaned, but Akio simply grinned at me and brushed off my brother's prodding remark. The 22nd floor, Akio replied. You must both be too tired to do anything tonight, I assume. After travelling so far? No way. Let's see the city, Sam exuberantly requested. My sister was far too exhausted for that, but she, like me, seemed surprised to see our brother so animated. We exchanged a look, and I could tell that neither of us wanted to squander the opportunity to quash his surliness. Millie nodded her head, and Akio excitedly donned his favourite jacket. Brilliant! I want to take you to my favourite shop in the city, my boyfriend said. Mukashi. Akio took us to the shop that I had visited with him on so many occasions. It operated out of a house belonging to an elderly lady named Mai. She was no entrepreneur. You couldn't even find her place of business online. It was a secret store, known only to family and friends. I forget how Akio met her. Mai greeted us at 10 o'clock in the evening and led us into her home. Does she ever sleep? I wondered. What is this place? Sam asked. Mukashi, Mai answered. It means long ago. There are all sorts of weird and wonderful things in here, Akio said. Things of immense power, Mai qualified. Who's this creepy guy? Sam asked. He was pointing at a painting on the wall, a horrifying piece of art that I would skillfully swerve whenever Akio took me into my shop. It depicted a gangly nude man. From his head to his toes, he was composed of shrunken, contorted, screaming people, reminiscent of those canvases that artists build from hundreds of miniature photographs. A nightmarish version of that. He wore a crown on his head, a crown forged of human hearts. The blood of the organised organs trickled down the man's horrible head, drowning some of the miniature people that formed his face. And this ruler of a dark and demented realm sat on a throne of bones. Many cultures have mentioned his name in hushed whispers, Mai explained. The entity is known in Japanese circles as Deikingu, the Deiking. It's horrible and incredible, Millie shuddered. I nodded in agreement with my anxious sister. It was beautiful, but it was also unspeakably sinister. Neither Millie nor I were fans of the macabre. I suppose the same could be said of our brother, but unlike us, he neither feared nor revered the artwork. Why is it so poorly lit? Sam asked. You made a valid point. Everything else in the shop basked in the warm, homely glow of Mai's pleasant abode, but the painting lurked in the darkness. Still, I'd never complained about that. I was happy for it to be hidden. I didn't want to know what dire details the light might reveal. He cannot live in the dark. He draws power from the light, Mai explained. Anyway, I'm sorry, but it isn't for sale. I only keep it there for protection. Akio, I have some very exciting new antiques in stock. Would you like to take a look? Akio enthusiastically nodded, and he followed the old lady to the other side of the room. Meanwhile, Sam eagerly eyed the painting, refusing to move along. Come on, Millie urged. I can't squeeze past you in this cramped room. Keep moving. I just want to get a better look at it, Sam chuckled. I left my phone back at the apartment. Have you got yours, Heidi? I begrudgingly handed my phone over to him, and I could sense my sister clenching her body nervously. Everything happened so quickly. I should have kept the phone to myself. The flash of the camera filled up Mai's claustrophobic room. What was that? The old lady screeched, running towards us. Relax, Sam replied. Mai proceeded to brutally berate Sam in Japanese. I've no idea what she said, but judging by the pale look on Akio's face, it mustn't have been pleasant in the slightest. Who is this fool, Akio? Mai asked in English. Akio began. I'm so sorry, Mai, I interrupted tearily. He's my rude brother. Have you no respect, young man? The woman cried. At that moment I realised Mai wasn't angry, as I had initially presumed. She was frightened. Don't worry, Sam insisted. I'm not going to leak your painting online. The picture didn't even come out properly anyway. My brother showed the four of us his photograph. The camera flash had illuminated the frame. Yet, horrifically, Deikingu was nowhere to be seen. Sam was showing us a photo of a blank canvas. I looked at the actual painting and breathed a sigh of relief to see that the dreadful Deiking was still sitting on his throne of bones. You have released it, Mai croakily cried. May the darkness save you. Okay. Look, I'm sorry for upsetting you, but there's no need to say a strange thing like that, Sam said, scowling. We'll leave now, Mai, Akio said, herding us out of the shop. I'm so sorry. You have a lovely home, Millie meekly added before we left the store. I scolded my older brother for the duration of the walk home. When we reached the Kyo's apartment building, Sam pulled me to one side. I'm sorry, Heidi, he said. I didn't come all of this way to upset you. I was excited to meet Akio, and I wanted to come to Japan. I wanted to see a new life. We really miss you back home, you know. You have a funny way of showing it, I huffed. How will I ever show my face in my shop again? Look, Sam trailed off. His eyes glazed over, transfixed by something behind me. I twisted my head, but there was nothing on the other side of the road. Nothing but a garish neon sign above a restaurant. What? I asked. Nothing, Sam said, shaking his head and returning his gaze to me. Come on, let's buzz Akio to let us inside. I have to apologise to him, don't I? I probably seem like a grumpy man. Well, that'd be an accurate impression, I replied, rolling my eyes. When we entered the flat, Sam adopted a demeanour that was much more relaxed, and that meant Millie and I could relax too. No more conducting damage control for our foot-in-mouth sibling. I'm ready to hit the hay, Millie yawned. You guys have only had to tolerate Sam for a few hours. It's been a whole day for me. I chuckled. Well, the spare bed's made up for you, Millie. Sam, it's the sofa for you. That's what a dog deserves, I understand, Sam teased, sparking a round of laughter that seemed to diffuse the earlier tension of the evening. After we had all prepared ourselves for bed, I found myself reflecting on Sam's apology. My brother had always been a throbbing splinter beneath my skin, but he was still family. I'm just going to go and clear the air with him, I said to Akio. I won't be able to sleep until I do. Of course. Also, Heidi, Akio started. I turned to face my smiling partner, who was tucked tightly beneath the duvet. Yeah? I asked. Still not as painful as your parents' visit, he chortled. I threw a nearby pair of socks at him, and I strolled down the corridor to the lounge. I realised Sam was still awake, as the wall of the hallway was basking in a warm orange glow from the living room. I rounded the corner and found my brother on the sofa, scrolling through his phone. "Hey," I said. "I just want you to know that I'm really happy to see you. I missed you and Millie too." Sam smiled. "At least I'm not as bad as Mum and Dad, right? I've not begged you to come back to England yet." I grinned. "That's a low bar, but you're not wrong. Night, Sam." Wait, how do you turn off this lamp, by the way? The cord's really fiddly. I had been strolling out of the room, but I turned around to face Sam and answer his question. And that was when I screamed. Behind the sofa, hovering above my brother, was a tall man. I immediately realised it was the horrendous figure from the painting in my shop. He appeared far worse in the flesh. His body was composed of tiny humans who writhed and wriggled in agony. They were mutilated beyond recognition. What remained of their faces seemed to ceaselessly morph, as if the creature were built of so many victims that it could not reveal all of them at once. Sam had already been pulling the cord as I started to scream, and he figured out how to turn off the lamp on his own. We sat in the darkness for a split second, but he rapidly turned the lamp back on. "What?" he cried. "Why did you scream? What's wrong?" Deikingu had vanished. The darkness had extinguished it. "Turn the light back off," I coldly commanded. Sam's eyes widened. We shared a knowing look, and I suddenly realised what he had seen beneath the neon sign outside Akio's apartment building. Soundlessly and rapidly, he turned off the lamp, plunging the lounge back into a secure pit of darkness. Millie and Akio emerged from their rooms, but I ushered them back inside and told a white lie about Sam pulling a frightening prank. Everybody went back to bed, and Sam and I said nothing of what we'd seen. When Akio woke, around 7 in the morning, he was startled to see me quivering and eyeing the ceiling with bloodshot pupils. Pulling an all-nighter wasn't exactly my decision, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen in the living room. It was no hallucination. I believed that. I didn't know whether Akio would believe that. "Are you okay?" he asked. "You look rough." "Love you too," I replied. "I just couldn't sleep." Akio ate up the lie, but Sam cast jittery glances in my direction throughout breakfast. We had both seen the Deiking. Neither of us needed to confirm that aloud. The terrible truth was etched on our fragile faces. Seemingly oblivious to my unsettled disposition, Akio jubilantly assumed the role of tour guide and encouraged us to go on a day out to his favourite park. Millie's enthusiasm overshadowed the solemnness of my brother and me. I was too distracted by my terrible thoughts to feign happiness. Every sound and movement haunted me. A sharp wind was pursuing us. It nipped and nibbled at the nape of my neck. I noticed Sam shivering, but nobody else seemed to react to the weather. It was when I realised it wasn't a gust of wind. It was the sound of human wailing. I turned to face the source of the icy noise. As soon as I did, it stopped. Everything stopped. The people in the park had disappeared. Only Sam and I remained. "No," my brother cried. I finally absorbed my surroundings. It was an unusually sunny November afternoon, and shade could only be found beneath the scarce leaves of autumnal cherry trees. In the heart of the empty park, which seemed to have slipped into a splintered moment of reality, was exactly what I had feared I would see. Deikingu. The entity with bubbling skin took purposeful strides through the grassy clearing. Its horrifying flesh glistened in the midday sun. Driven by a primal instinct to survive, I pointed to the cherry trees before I even realised I was doing so. I screeched, "Come on!" The Deiking managed to glide towards us with such effortless speed but we reached the shade of the cherry trees in time. The horrifying entity stood at the edge of the shaded grass and watched. "Now what?" Sam asked. "How will we ever leave this place?" As I struggled to think of an answer, Sam's eyes suddenly rolled backwards, concealing his pupils. His head lolled to the side, as did that of the Deiking. I cried in helpless horror, and the creature's wailing sound returned. The small bodies of human victims squirmed sickeningly as the Deiking stared deeply into Sam's soul. Then, my brother's eyes returned to normal, and he looked back at me with a soothing smile. "We spoke," Sam said. "The fault is entirely mine." Before I could ask what he meant, I gasped at the sight of my brother strolling towards the hellish being in the sunlight. "What are you doing?" I screamed. My body, whether immobilized by fear or some supernatural force, was unable to reach for Sam. I couldn't restrain him. I could only watch as he serenely entered the sunlight and accepted the Deiking's cold embrace. It was an indescribably horrific spectacle, which I cannot scrub from my memory. Deikingu curled his wriggling arms around Sam and effortlessly enveloped his body. My brother screamed with frightening ferocity. His flesh melted and merged with the bodies of the other eternally tortured victims. He became part of the graveyard that composed the Deiking. Suddenly, the sun blinded me. When the glare subsided, the sound and life of the world returned. Akio and Millie came running over to me. They found me sitting in the grass beneath the shade of the cherry tree. Onlookers were concerned by my cry, but they quickly went about their days. "What's wrong, Heidi?" Akio asked. "We lost you for a second. How did you get all the way over here so quickly?" "Where's Sam?" I breathlessly blubbered. Millie looked around, frowning. Neither she nor Akio had an answer for my question. Sam was never found. And how could I tell anyone that the Deiking had added him to its barbarous collection? This was all confirmed when Mai allowed us back into her shop. Akio still doesn't know what I saw, but Mai knew. I could see it in her eyes. She saw me looking at the painting. She saw me shudder at the sight of Sam's tattooed, limbless torso, which formed the left tip of Deikingu's malicious smile. I think the lady had dimmed the lights since the last time we'd been in her store. After all, the darkest things live in the light.